There's something happening behind the scenes of your everyday experience. Something so foundational, so interwoven with the fabric of your existence, that most people go their entire lives without even knowing it's there. But it's been operating in the background this whole time. Quiet, relentless, unseen. Right now, as you sit here, breathing, thinking, listening, an invisible loop is editing your reality. And not just occasionally, but continuously. It's active even when you sleep, even when you're unaware, especially then. This loop is not mystical in the traditional sense. It's not just philosophy or wishful thinking. It's embedded in the very structure of the quantum world. Your thoughts, your emotions, your focus, all of them are feeding into it. And every moment, this loop responds by updating the outer world you see. This is not an exaggeration. This is not metaphor. This is physics meeting perception, energy syncing with intention. And you've been interacting with it every day without fully realizing it. Some call it the observer effect. Others refer to it as consciousness shaping reality. But those are just pieces. This goes further. It's more than observation. It's a feedback loop between your awareness and the raw data of the universe. Every choice, every emotion, every expectation you hold, it all loops back into the system and reprograms it. This is the reason manifestation works sometimes and fails other times. This is why patterns in your life repeat, why certain outcomes seem inevitable, and why déjà vu feels less like coincidence and more like a glitch. What you're about to discover isn't theory. It's a way of understanding how this hidden mechanism could be operating behind your every experience. We're going to trace this loop from its quantum roots to its psychological consequences. We'll look at how visualization and belief don't just inspire, they instruct. How your personal timeline may not be as linear as you thought. And how the structure of this loop might be giving rise to parallel versions of you in real time. Across this journey, we'll expose how emotional frequencies act as input codes, how patterns echo through the field until interrupted, and how you can shift your state to shift your world. This is not about escaping reality. It's about understanding how reality works so you can navigate it consciously. No blind optimism. No mystical vagueness. Just clear, focused decoding of the loop that could be writing your experience right now. Next, we'll pull back the curtain on this phenomenon and ask the question: are you actually living in a self-correcting universe? There's a mechanism behind the structure of reality that operates like editing software. It scans for inconsistencies. It adjusts probabilities. It rebalances based on attention, energy, and coherence. It doesn't think or reason the way we do, but it corrects. It aligns. It loops. And in this loop, your role is central. You are not just a participant. You are the cursor. This mechanism can be described as a quantum feedback loop. At the core of it lies a simple but mind-altering idea. Reality does not exist as a fixed, objective thing until it is observed, until it is measured, until someone you interacts with it. The very act of awareness finalizes what was once only a field of probability. But it doesn't end there. Once this measurement occurs, a new state is born, and the loop continues. The observer shapes the result. The result influences the observer. And the process cycles over and over in a constantly updating loop of feedback. This is where the idea of a self-correcting universe becomes more than just poetic metaphor. If everything that exists is based on probabilities, and your observation plays a role in collapsing those probabilities into outcomes, then the universe is continuously adjusting itself based on the observer's internal state. Now pause and think about this carefully. What you expect influences what you see. What you see influences how you feel. How you feel loops back into what you expect. And the process repeats. But here's where it gets even more compelling. This loop is not neutral. Prefers coherence. It favors stability. So when you hold a strong belief, even if it's limiting or fear-based, the loop stabilizes around it. Not because the belief is true, but because the system rewards consistency. This is why it can feel like life is stuck. Like nothing changes no matter how much effort you put in. Because at a quantum level, consistency sends a stronger signal than desire. If your dominant thought is, "Nothing ever works out for me," Then that thought gets encoded into the loop as a stable pattern. And the universe, favoring feedback over friction, aligns reality to reflect that expectation. This is not the universe punishing you. It's just the loop doing its job, responding to the inputs you provide. To further understand this concept, let's look at a popular idea that often overlaps: simulation theory. Simulation theory suggests that reality may not be base reality at all, but instead a generated environment, rendered in real time based on consciousness. Now, whether or not we're inside a literal simulation is irrelevant here. What matters is this: the behavior of the quantum world supports the concept that observation affects outcome. This is not just philosophy. It is measurable in laboratory experiments. One of the most well-known examples is the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment, where particles seem to retroactively decide their behavior based on future measurement. Think about that. Reality can appear to retroactively adjust itself based on what you become aware of after the fact. This is the loop in action. The observer changes the observed. The observed reinforces the observer. Time itself appears to respond to this mechanism. Now, consider your daily experience through this lens. When you repeatedly focus on certain problems, patterns, or emotional states, you are providing a steady stream of input into the loop. The loop reads this input and begins to stabilize a version of reality around it. Let's say someone constantly thinks about scarcity. Not in a philosophical way, but viscerally: anxiety, fear, stress about not having enough. The loop doesn't evaluate this input as good or bad. It simply interprets it as a dominant signal. And so the outer experience begins to reflect that same frequency, reinforcing the original thought. Scarcity shows up in finances, relationships, and health, not because of fate, but because the loop is responding to coherence, not preference. And here's the deeper point. You may not have consciously chosen the signal you're broadcasting. Many of these patterns come from early experiences, inherited beliefs, collective conditioning. But the loop doesn't care where the signal came from. It just amplifies what's most coherent. This means that until the pattern is interrupted, the loop keeps reinforcing the same version of reality. But, and this is critical, the loop can be interrupted. That's where your conscious awareness becomes powerful. The moment you start noticing the loop instead of unconsciously reacting to it, you shift from being shaped by it to shaping it. And this shift doesn't require massive changes overnight. It requires sustained focus. Even small acts of conscious observation can begin to reprogram the feedback mechanism. For example, noticing a limiting thought and pausing before reacting. Replacing a repeated complaint with a question about opportunity. Holding a different emotional tone long enough for the field to pick it up. These are the seeds of new input. The more consistent the new input becomes, the more the loop begins correcting in your favor. This brings us to the truth that most people miss. Reality is not a static object. It is a responsive interface. It's not showing you what's true. It's showing you what's stabilized. Change the signal long enough and the feedback will follow. That's how reality gets rewritten. Not by force, not by desperate willpower, but by precision, focus, and consistency in what you feed into the loop. Next, we will explore how simply observing something has the power to alter it, and how this one principle may be the most direct clue to how consciousness is creating reality in real time. Let's now examine the observer paradox. And why watching changes everything. The reality you experience is not waiting for you to arrive. It's responding to your awareness the moment you interact with it. This is not metaphor, it's quantum fact, and the implications of that fact are staggering. In the foundations of quantum physics lies a puzzle that has left even the most brilliant minds both fascinated and disturbed. At the center of that puzzle is the concept of observation, not as a passive act, but as a dynamic force that shapes the behavior of the physical world. To understand this, we must turn to the famous experiment that cracked open our understanding of reality. The double-slit experiment. In this setup, particles such as electrons are fired at a barrier with two slits. Behind the barrier is a detection screen. When both slits are open and no one observes which slit the particles go through, the pattern that forms on the screen is not two bands. Instead, It's an interference pattern, suggesting that each particle somehow acts like a wave and goes through both slits at once. But when scientists place a detector to find out which slit the particle travels through, the pattern shifts completely. Now, it behaves like a particle again, passing through only one slit, and the interference pattern disappears. Why does simply measuring the particle's path cause it to stop behaving like a wave and act like a particle? Why does the act of watching it collapse all possibilities into just one? This is the observer paradox. And it's not an isolated phenomenon. This isn't a glitch in one experiment. It's a pattern found repeatedly in quantum research. When awareness enters the equation, potential collapses into form. You are not a bystander to reality. You are a participant, a creator. Your observation is a trigger that collapses probabilities into a singular outcome. This is not spiritual metaphor, it is supported by empirical data. Now here's where it connects directly to your life. Everything you look at, your circumstances, your finances, your relationships, your sense of self, is being affected by how you look at it. This means your focus is a tuning device. But more than that, it is a generator. What you pay attention to, you energize. What you energize, you materialize. And the feedback loop begins. This changes how you understand personal development, manifestation, even healing. The problem isn't that your desires are ignored. The problem is that your attention is fractured, untrained, often fixated on what's missing rather than what's emerging. This is why visualization is effective, not because it's positive thinking, but because it is focused, intentional observation. And that observation sends instructions into the loop. Let's take an example. You're trying to shift your financial situation, but your attention is consumed by bills, debts, and fear of lack. From a quantum perspective, your observation is locking the wave of possibility into the particle of scarcity. You're collapsing a narrow version of reality over and over again, simply by what you're observing. Shift your focus, even without physical change, and you begin to introduce instability into that old loop. New probabilities start to vibrate beneath the surface. It takes time, consistency, and emotional charge. But the loop can be rewritten. This isn't about denial. It's about direction. You're not ignoring what exists. You're learning to observe differently so that what exists can change. The observer paradox doesn't just apply to particles. It applies to your perception of time, health, and even identity. Studies have shown that when individuals observe themselves through specific narratives, whether as victims, creators, failures, or visionaries, the brain begins to align physical outcomes with that identity. Why? Because your inner observer is shaping the data field of your body and your life. Let's look at another layer. Measurement is not neutral. In quantum systems, how you set up the measurement device affects the outcome. Apply this to your own consciousness. The lens through which you observe reality, your beliefs, emotions, memories, expectations, acts as a filter that shapes what the loop reflects back to you. You are not seeing reality as it is. You are seeing reality as your observation allows it to be. This doesn't mean that all of life is illusion, but it does mean that your reality is entangled with your awareness. Every thought, every glance, every judgment becomes part of the measurement process. This is the real power and responsibility of the observer. Here's the transformative insight. You can train your observation. Mindfulness isn't just a stress reduction tool. It's quantum hygiene. It's the art of watching without attachment, observing without collapse. And when practiced with consistency, it opens space for new possibilities to emerge, possibilities that the loop can respond to in radically different ways. This is how reality starts to shift. When you shift the lens, you do not need to fight the old. You need only to stop reinforcing it with your gaze. Next, we will explore the nature of thought as more than internal chatter. We'll see how your thoughts act as energetic ripples, forming echoes in the quantum field that return not just as feelings, but as future experiences. Let's examine how your mind is imprinting the fabric of reality itself. Every thought you think is not just an idea. It's a signal. It's a pattern. It's a blueprint that interacts with the unseen architecture of reality. Thoughts are not confined to the brain. They radiate, They encode energy, and they form what many traditions have called thought forms, subtle structures in the field that carry intention, frequency, and inertia. In quantum terms, thoughts are energetic pulses that imprint the field of probability. Once a thought form is charged, especially with strong emotion, it begins to echo. This echo doesn't just stay within you. It loops outward, distorting or reinforcing your experience of reality. This is where the concept of thought as causation becomes incredibly important. Not because thoughts are magical spells, but because they are informational carriers that interact with the feedback loop. They feed the mechanism that writes and rewrites the version of reality you experience. Let's break it down. When you think a thought, neurons fire. But alongside the electrical impulse is a field of energy that extends beyond your physical body. This field is measurable. It interacts with other fields. Now add emotion. Emotion is fuel. It gives the thought form weight, magnetism, density. And the more repetitive the thought, the more stable the form. Over time, this form becomes a signal in the loop, a kind of command. The loop receives it and starts adjusting probabilities around it. You begin to notice events, people, and outcomes that match the vibration of the thought form. This is not confirmation bias, it's quantum resonance. You're not just interpreting reality through thought. You're interacting with it. So what happens when your dominant thought forms are shaped by anxiety, regret, or scarcity? The echoes come back distorted. You find yourself living in reaction. Each experience becomes proof of the thought that preceded it, creating a tightening spiral of evidence. This is the trap of unconscious thought loops. You think, I'm not safe. Life reflects danger. You feel unsafe. You think it again, and the loop tightens. But here's the key. Thought forms can be interrupted. Because they're energetic constructs, they rely on attention for fuel. Remove the attention, and the structure begins to dissolve. Even more powerful. Replace the thought form with a higher frequency one. One grounded in presence, coherence, and clarity, and the loop begins to rewire. Here's how this process becomes practical. Start noticing the thoughts you revisit. Not just the loud ones, the subtle, repetitive undercurrents. Thoughts like, this is just how life is. People always leave. I'll never get ahead. These are not random. They're templates. And the more you energize them, the more they shape the echoes of your future. Start replacing those templates, not through denial, but through design. If you catch the thought, I'll never get ahead, meet it with, what new outcome am I open to seeing now? That single interruption sends a new instruction into the loop. With repetition, the old thought form weakens. The new one stabilizes, and the feedback from the loop begins to shift. Visualization enhances this process dramatically. When you not only think a thought but see it internally, feel it emotionally, and stabilize it with repetition, you are building a full-spectrum signal into the loop. This is why visualization isn't fantasy. It's conscious construction. The echo it creates in the field is not passive. It is formative. In the quantum loop, the thought that carries the strongest emotion and most frequent repetition becomes the dominant command. Your mind is not just perceiving your world. It's helping write the code for what version of the world you experience next. This is where clarity becomes power. When your thoughts are scattered, the loop reflects incoherence. When your thoughts are stable and intentional, the loop responds with matching structure. Begin asking yourself, what thought am I repeating most today? What outcome is that thought pointing toward? What higher frequency thought could I stabilize instead? Do this not once. Do it consistently, because repetition is how thought forms become signals. And signals are what the quantum field echoes back as experience. Next, we will explore how the very structure of time itself is not what it seems. We'll examine how the past and future are connected through the same loop, and how this opens the door to rewriting personal history and shifting your trajectory entirely. Let's look closer at the illusion of time. And the loop of now. Time appears linear, past behind you, present in front, future waiting down the road. But this is not how reality actually behaves when viewed through the lens of quantum theory and consciousness. The deeper truth is far more strange and far more powerful. Time, at its most fundamental level, is not a straight arrow. It's a field, a loop, an interwoven mesh of probabilities and potentials, all accessible through the portal of the now. And the reason this matters is because your current state is sending signals not only forward but backward, reorganizing meaning, emotion, and even outcomes you thought were fixed. The linear model of time, one moment following the next in an irreversible chain, is a construct of human perception. It's how we process change. But at the quantum scale, particles behave in ways that defy this sequence entirely. In certain experiments, particles seem to react not only to current measurement, but to future choices about measurement. This suggests a feedback system in which events can be influenced in both directions, not just past to future, but also future to past. So when you shift a belief, change your emotional state, or redirect your awareness today, you aren't just altering your future. You are also destabilizing the pattern of your past. This is why healing isn't just emotional, it's energetic. You're not only feeling different about what happened, you're altering how your system encodes it. You're reaching into the loop and creating new meaning, new memory, and sometimes new outcomes altogether. Here's the paradox. The past, as you remember it, isn't static. It lives inside your current state. Memory is not a folder on a shelf, it's a dynamic process. Each time you recall an event, you don't retrieve it. You reconstruct it based on your present frequency, emotion, and perspective. This means the past is being rewritten constantly by the present. Think about what this implies for personal transformation. If your current self is coherent, stable, and emotionally elevated, the version of the past you carry becomes lighter, clearer, and less constrictive. But if your current self is entangled in resentment, pain, or shame, then your system reactivates a version of the past that tightens the loop and locks in unwanted patterns. This isn't psychological reinterpretation. It's functional quantum alignment. You're emitting a signal into the loop that organizes not just what's ahead, but what's behind. So why does this matter? Because so many people believe they're prisoners of their history. They think events from their past define their current limits. But if the past is a loop and the loop is flexible, then your present awareness holds the keys to every locked door behind you. Start with this core idea. Time is not location-based. It's state-based. When you shift your emotional state, your brain chemistry changes. Neural pathways rewire. Memory networks adjust. But more than that, your energetic signature changes, and this sends a new signal into the field, including to your history. In this model, time isn't a line. It's a loop of resonance. This is why breakthroughs can feel like sudden collapses of years of conditioning. Not because the past was erased, but because the loop no longer supports the old version of it. Think of it like software. You're not deleting the old program, you're writing a better one over it. Same data, new interface. This loop of time also explains why patterns can repeat for years, even decades. You may think you've moved forward, but if the emotional signature you're carrying is the same, then your loop is tuned to the same timeline. The you of the past and the you of the present are entangled, and the result is a repetitive script playing out across your experiences. To break it, you don't need to go back. You need to stabilize a different signal now, a frequency that's incompatible with the old timeline. And here's the practice. Every moment you choose a new thought, a new focus, a new emotional response, you're issuing a new command to the field. You're literally nudging yourself into a different part of the loop. This isn't metaphor. It's mechanics. Every energetic signal you emit maps to a set of probabilities. Some of those probabilities include timelines where you succeed, others where you repeat. What determines which version gets stabilized is the signal you maintain most consistently. This is the power of the now. Not as a motivational idea, as a quantum anchor. People ask, can I really change my past? The answer is you already are. Every time you feel peace about something that once triggered you, every time you shift from blame to understanding, you are changing the configuration of your loop. The external events remain what they were, but their meaning, influence, and energetic weight no longer constrain your timeline. And that's the point. You're not trapped by what happened. You're guided by how you respond to it right now. So stop looking backward with defeat. The loop isn't there to trap you. It's there to inform you. It's responsive, intelligent, and most of all, writable. Next, we will step into one of the most provocative ideas of modern quantum theory and consciousness research, that you are not the only you. There may be countless versions of your life running in parallel, waiting for you to align with the one you truly desire. Let's explore the idea of multiple timelines and how your focus chooses which version you live. Right now, there are other versions of you, not just metaphorical ones, actual energetic versions. Potential lives running alongside this one, some remarkably close, others vastly different, separated not by space but by vibration. This is not science fiction. It's a direct extension of quantum mechanics and the interpretation known as the many worlds theory. And while its implications are still being debated in labs and lecture halls, its practical consequences are unfolding every day, in the mirror of your lived experience. Here's the idea. Every choice you make generates a branching path, a fork in the field of probability. On one path you said yes, on another you said no. On one you quit the job, on another you stayed. Each decision spins out a new thread, and each thread becomes a timeline, a parallel stream of existence with its own version of you. Most people experience this concept through the feeling of alternate outcomes. The life I could have had, the path I didn't take. But those lives are not just memories or regrets. They are real versions of reality, coexisting in the multiverse of your consciousness. This is where it becomes practical. Your current focus is the tuning dial. The version of you that becomes your experience is the one that matches your sustained frequency. Let's break that down. If your thoughts are aligned with confidence, vision, and gratitude, your energetic signal begins to match a timeline where those qualities are real and reflected in your circumstances. That version of your life already exists in potential. Your job is to become compatible with it, not to chase it, not to fantasize about it, but to tune to it. This is the function of alignment. It's not a passive feeling. It's an act of energetic selection. And once you understand that, your daily experience becomes a series of quantum choices. Every moment, you are either reinforcing your current timeline or stepping into a new one, not metaphorically, functionally. This model explains why dramatic change can happen suddenly, why one shift in mindset, one act of bravery, one realization can cause your entire life to feel different overnight. You didn't magically manifest a new reality. You became coherent with a timeline that was already available. This is also why sabotage happens. When you momentarily shift into a higher frequency version of yourself, but then regress into old thought forms, fear or shame, the loop pulls you back to the timeline that matches that lower vibration. The shift wasn't fake. It just wasn't stabilized. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. A single powerful affirmation won't shift your timeline if it's drowned out by hours of self-doubt. But a sustained emotional tone, even one that seems subtle, will eventually overwrite the loop. It's not about force. It's about frequency. So how do you shift timelines consciously? Start by identifying the version of you want to experience. What does that version believe? How does that version feel about failure, success, connection? What are their habits? Their non-negotiables? Then match those characteristics, not in the distant future, but now. This isn't pretending. It's patterning. You're offering the loop a new dominant signal, and the loop will begin correcting around it. Be warned. As you shift, resistance will appear. Not because you're failing, but because the loop is testing stability. Old patterns will surface. External friction may show up. But this is not evidence that it isn't working. It's evidence that the field is destabilizing the old timeline. Stay with the new signal long enough and the loop will recalibrate. You'll begin to notice different people, opportunities, and events appearing, almost as if by magic. But it's not magic. It's matching. Your external world is starting to reflect the parallel version of you you've been tuning into. And here's something radical. You don't need to find the best version of your life. It already exists. There is a timeline where your gifts are realized. Your relationships are whole. Your purpose is active. That version is real. But the key isn't chasing it. It's becoming it. So stop asking, when will things change? And start asking, what version of me am I rehearsing today? Because the version you practice is the version you stabilize. And once stabilized, the loop begins to reinforce it, just as it did the old ones. Next, we will unlock a concept you've likely used, perhaps without knowing its full power: visualization. More than a motivational trick, it may be the actual programming language of the quantum loop. We'll now explore why imagination isn't fantasy. It's code. Imagination is not escape. It's architecture. And visualization isn't a creative luxury. It's a functional input to the system that writes your experience. Right now, whether you realize it or not, you are visualizing constantly. Most of it is unconscious. Scenes of failure. Conversations that haven't happened. Fear of things going wrong. Internal rehearsals of being ignored, rejected, or overlooked. These mental images carry weight, and they are being read by the loop. Because in the field of quantum possibility, thought is not neutral. And when a thought takes on sensory detail, when it is rich with emotion and internal realism, it becomes a directive. It becomes code. Visualization is not daydreaming. It is instructive frequency. The loop doesn't speak English. It doesn't interpret motivation posters or vague wishes. It responds to vivid internal states, images that feel real enough to the nervous system that they generate matching chemistry, brainwave patterns, and emotional resonance. This is the zone where visualization becomes a form of reality scripting. And once you learn to work with it intentionally, you can begin to install the signal of the life you want, instead of the one you're defaulting into. Here's the fundamental shift. Most people imagine by accident. They replay worst-case scenarios. They anticipate failure. They see themselves stuck. And the loop stabilizes those visions not because they're true, but because they're energetically consistent. Your brain doesn't always distinguish between real experience and imagined experience. If you see it clearly enough and feel it fully enough, your system encodes it. That encoding becomes signal, and the signal gets reflected. So now, imagine what happens when you take control of this process. You deliberately visualize a future version of yourself. Not just intellectually, but sensorily. You feel the breath of that version, the posture, the tone of voice, the environment, the responses from others. And you hold that image not once but daily. You begin to overwrite the loop. Each visualization sends out a ripple of instruction. And the more you repeat it, the more your field stabilizes around it. The result? Synchronicities appear. Opportunities surface. Confidence increases. Not because you're manipulating the world, but because you're matching the frequency of a timeline that already exists. Let's talk about the mechanics of this. Your imagination taps into the same neural pathways your body uses for actual experience. When athletes visualize a routine with extreme detail, their muscles activate in micromovements. Brain scans show patterns nearly identical to those created during physical execution. This means that visualization is not fake action. It is preparation biologically and energetically. And in the quantum loop, preparation is signal. When your system begins to believe the image is real, it behaves as though it is. Hormones shift, focus sharpens, behavior aligns, and the field reflects this internal coherence with new data. The loop is listening, and the language it listens to most closely is internal certainty. Visualization, when repeated with clarity and emotional intensity, trains that certainty. Now, here's what stops most people. They try to visualize outcomes, not identities. They focus on winning the lottery, finding a partner, or getting recognition. But they don't visualize the version of themselves who naturally lives those outcomes. So the signal is inconsistent, because the image doesn't match the emotional blueprint of their current self. Feels like fantasy, not foundation. Shift your focus. Stop visualizing the outcome. Start visualizing the embodiment. See yourself as the person who speaks differently, thinks differently, chooses differently, who is no longer rehearsing the past, but practicing the new. Visualize the identity, not the event. That's where the real alignment occurs. And when you do this long enough, the outer world adjusts. Because the loop is reading your internal programming, not your external hustle. Let's break down the key principles that make visualization work as quantum code. Clarity: your image must be specific. The brain doesn't encode vague ideas. Abundance means nothing to your nervous system, but sitting in your home office, looking at a statement with a specific figure, feeling deep gratitude, that sends a clear signal. Emotion: feeling is the frequency. The more you infuse the image with genuine emotional response, the more powerfully your body and field respond. Emotions are the fuel that push thought into the field. Repetition: one visualization won't override years of conditioning. The loop stabilizes around what is consistent. Practice the image daily like training a muscle. Present tense encoding: visualize it as already happening. Not someday, not maybe, but now. This aligns your physiology and field with the timeline you want, not the one you're waiting for. Neutralization of the old image: when the old reality shows up, don't react with fear. Recognize it as residue. Stay loyal to the image you're stabilizing. The old must sometimes surface before it dissolves. The most powerful use of visualization is not in manipulating outcomes, but in establishing energetic compatibility. You're not tricking the universe. You're training your system. And once your system is stable in that frequency, the loop adjusts. Reality mirrors it back. Not through fantasy, but through physics. Next, we look at what blocks this process, why so many people stay stuck in the same story even after doing the work. The answer lies in unconscious patterning that loops beneath awareness. Let's now examine the trap that catches most people, and how to release yourself from it. There's a reason your life keeps circling back to the same outcomes. It's not because you're failing. It's not because you're cursed. It's because the loop is obeying a deeper program, one you didn't consciously install. And until you update that program, the feedback doesn't change. These are the patterns. Invisible, inherited, installed through repetition, trauma, culture, and memory. They operate like background code, executing the same subroutines over and over again, regardless of your intentions. Patterns are not personal. They're mechanical. And the moment you recognize them for what they are, loops, not truths, you begin to reclaim your power. So where do these patterns come from? Many of them form in early childhood. During the formative years, your brain is in a highly suggestible state, absorbing beliefs and emotional responses from your environment. You watch how your caretakers handle stress, money, love, anger. And your system stores that information not as opinion but as survival code. These codes become the structure of your energetic loop. You internalize messages like, love is earned, money is stressful, my needs are too much, success creates rejection. You're not aware these beliefs are running, but the loop is, and the loop reflects them with precision. So when life keeps repeating, when relationships collapse, when money never sticks, when anxiety spikes at the edge of opportunity, it's not because you're weak. It's because the pattern hasn't been interrupted. Patterns create energetic inertia. They stabilize versions of reality that match your earliest programming. Even if you've changed your mind intellectually, the loop responds to what's encoded emotionally. This is why talk alone won't change your life. Information doesn't rewrite patterns. Energy does. You have to go deeper than thought. You have to feel the origin point, not to dwell in it, but to defuse it. Here's how the pattern trap works. A familiar situation triggers a familiar emotion. That emotion activates a familiar belief. That belief confirms a familiar identity. And the loop continues. This is why people recreate the same argument in every relationship, or sabotage themselves when they get too close to success. The pattern is stronger than their conscious desire. But patterns lose power the moment they are seen clearly. You stop being inside the loop and start observing it. That's when the feedback begins to shift. There are 3 critical stages to disrupting a pattern. Identification: you must name the loop. You must catch the emotional tone that always precedes the repetition. Is it dread? Shame? Frustration? Find the emotional fingerprint. Disassociation: Realize that the pattern is not you. It's a program, a recording. Once you stop identifying with it, you can choose a different input. Replacement, you must install a new pattern, one that matches the version of reality you want to live in. This means new thoughts, yes, but more importantly, new emotional habits, new responses, new behaviors that contradict the old script. Every time you act outside the pattern, you destabilize the loop. This is where daily practices come in. Grounding, breath work, visualization, self-inquiry. These are not rituals for comfort, they're tools to interrupt the automation. You are building new neural pathways, new energetic pathways, and those become new instructions in the field. This process takes repetition. Not force, not guilt, but repetition. The old pattern took years to build. The new one must be reinforced with patience. Each time you catch the loop and choose differently, you are writing a new chapter. Even if nothing external shifts right away, the internal signal is changing. And once the signal changes consistently, the loop begins to reflect the new pattern. You may not have created the pattern, but you are the only one who can replace it. And the moment you stop blaming the loop and start programming it, everything begins to change. Next, we explore a powerful truth, that the frequency you hold emotionally is more than mood. It is the actual input that determines what reality forms around you. Let's now look at the tuning fork that sets the quantum field into motion. You've been taught to treat your emotions like reactions, side effects of external circumstances. But emotions aren't reactive. They're generative. They are not responses to reality. They are commands to it. Emotion is not a mood. It's frequency. And frequency is the language of the quantum field. At the deepest level, your life is organized around the emotional states you stabilize most often. These states emit signals, and those signals inform the loop. Over time, the loop responds not to what you say or want, but to the emotional charge you hold consistently. That charge becomes the resonance. The resonance determines what timeline you're in. Every time you wake up with anxiety and replay the reasons for it, you're not just describing your reality. You're selecting it. The loop reads the signal. It adjusts feedback accordingly. This explains why people can read all the right books, recite affirmations, and visualize endlessly, yet still recreate the same outcomes. Because the emotional frequency behind the words hasn't changed. The field doesn't read content. It reads coherence. So if your body is still running the emotional chemistry of fear, shame, or lack, then the reality that emerges around you will reflect that signal, no matter how many words you speak to the contrary. Think of your emotional state as a tuning fork. It vibrates even when silent, and the loop, like a sympathetic instrument, vibrates back at the same frequency. The question is not, what do I want? The question is, what am I resonating with? You can't fake frequency. You can't override a deeply held emotional tone with surface-level positivity. But you can shift the tone, and when you do, the signal that the field receives becomes different. The feedback becomes different. The options available begin to reorder. This is how quantum change begins, not with outer force, but with inner frequency alignment. Let's explore this more technically. Every emotion has a measurable energetic signature. High-frequency emotions, gratitude, love, peace, appreciation, produce coherence in the nervous system, in the electromagnetic field of the heart, and in brainwave patterns. This coherence becomes a clear, stable broadcast. Low-frequency emotions, fear, anger, despair, create chaotic signatures. The heart rhythm becomes erratic. The brain enters stress patterns. The field becomes fragmented. The quantum loop favors coherence. It reinforces what's steady. That's not a moral judgment, it's a structural truth. If your internal state is erratic, the feedback becomes unpredictable, scattered, often unstable. But when your emotional field becomes coherent, even without external evidence to justify it, the loop begins to reflect that pattern of clarity. This is why inner peace isn't passive. It's instructive. It becomes the organizing force of a new reality. So how do you begin to shift emotional frequency? Not by suppression. Not by faking joy when you feel grief. That only adds noise to the signal. You begin by noticing what your default emotional state is. Is it anticipation or dread? Is it guilt or gratitude? Is it resistance or openness? Your dominant emotion is your default broadcast. That's the loop's point of reference when shaping what happens next. Once you've identified that baseline, you can begin practicing a new emotional state, not as reaction but as input. For example, you want to move into greater flow and opportunity. Instead of fixating on goals or outcomes, you train your nervous system to experience appreciation now. Not because something amazing just happened, but because appreciation itself is the tuning fork. You breathe into the feeling of enough, of alignment, of access, and you let your body memorize it. Do this consistently enough and the loop starts updating your feedback. People call it luck, but it's not luck. It's resonance. There's a reason gratitude is often cited as the most powerful state. It's not because it's morally better. It's because it's energetically aligned with receiving. Gratitude tells the loop, this signal is full, this frequency is stable, and the loop reflects more experience that matches fullness and stability. The same applies in reverse. Resentment tells the loop, this signal is empty, this frequency is threatened, and the loop reflects more situations that match conflict and deprivation. None of this is mystical. It's field mechanics. You're not being judged. You're being mirrored. Let's look at an applied example. You're in a job you dislike. You want something better. You visualize a new role, affirm your worth, and send out applications. But underneath all of it is frustration, bitterness, and dread. You've taken the right actions, but the emotional signature behind them is dissonant. So the loop reflects frustration, rejections, no calls back, missed timing. Now contrast that with a scenario where, even before the job changes, you begin shifting how you feel daily, finding ways to feel engaged, clear, and connected regardless of circumstance. Your emotional field changes, and as a result, new opportunities begin to appear, not out of force, but through resonance. This is not about spiritual bypass. It's not ignoring dissatisfaction. It's learning to generate a different signal while holding a vision of change. That's how reality starts to match the frequency of your future, not the frustration of your past. Emotional frequency is your first creative tool. Before thought, before speech, before behavior. If the energy isn't coherent, the results won't be either. The goal is not to be happy all the time. It's to be clear. To move from emotional reactivity into intentional resonance. To stop broadcasting from the past and start transmitting from your chosen timeline. That's when the loop recalibrates. That's when timelines shift. Next, we move into one of the most overlooked pieces of the loop, synchronicity. These strange alignments are not accidents. They're not background noise. They're direct signals from the loop, showing you what frequency you're broadcasting and what timeline you're stabilizing. Let's now uncover what those so-called coincidences are actually trying to show you. You've had the feeling, a number repeating over and over. A thought pops into your head, and a moment later, someone speaks it aloud. A person you were just thinking of suddenly texts you. These are not trivial. They are not distractions. They are signals. Synchronicity is the whisper of the quantum loop. It's how the field lets you know your internal frequency is matching external data. You are in alignment with something precise. And the more coherent your signal, the more frequent and undeniable these events become. Synchronicity isn't magic. It's confirmation. It tells you where you are in the loop, whether you're slipping back into old timelines or locking into new ones. Most people ignore it. They label it coincidence or brush it off. But synchronicity is feedback. And like all feedback, it carries a message. Let's look at how this works mechanically. Every time you stabilize a thought, an emotion, a belief, you emit a frequency. That frequency interacts with the field, and the field begins to adjust probability pathways in response. Synchronicity is what happens when an unlikely event suddenly becomes likely because it matches your internal state. It's not that the event was sent to you. It's that your signal called it in. You changed your location in the field. And that location came with new data points. So when someone shows up to help you just after you commit to trusting more. When a job offer appears after weeks of clarity, not panic. When a quote or song or stranger confirms something you've been meditating on. That is the loop showing you. Alignment has occurred. But synchronicity does more than affirm. It instructs, because it appears in patterns. Those patterns reveal what's being stabilized. And that gives you the opportunity to steer the loop more consciously. Start tracking your synchronicities. Notice, what emotional state were you in just before they occurred? What thoughts were you repeating that day? What fears had you recently released? This is your lab. This is how you gather real evidence of how the loop works. The more aware you become of these patterns, the more precisely you can direct your signal. And the more feedback the loop sends in return. There's a kind of conversation happening between your internal state and the field. Most people aren't listening. But once you start noticing synchronicity as language, not randomness, you gain real-time guidance. This is especially important when you're in transition. When shifting from an old timeline to a new one, physical change is often delayed. The loop is still calibrating. And in that gap, synchronicity becomes your anchor. It lets you know the signal has been received, that the timeline is being rearranged, that even if the old structure hasn't dissolved yet, the new frequency has begun broadcasting. This is why staying emotionally coherent is critical, especially when nothing seems to be changing. Because synchronicities often spike just before external change becomes visible. Now, not all synchronicities are comfortable. Sometimes the loop reflects back your dominant fear. A conversation echoes your doubts. A chance encounter triggers unresolved pain. That too is synchronicity. Doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means the pattern is surfacing for revision. The loop is showing you what still holds charge. Use it. Ask, what frequency is this moment revealing? Is this feedback showing me a pattern to release or a signal to reinforce? How can I respond in a way that upgrades the next feedback cycle? Every synchronicity is an opportunity, either to stabilize the new or dissolve the old. You can invite more synchronicity, not by forcing outcomes, but by maintaining a steady internal signal and trusting the loop to reflect it. This means cultivating a state of curiosity, not control. Expectation, not obsession. Say clearly what you want, but then observe lightly. Don't stare at the clock. Stay emotionally present and let the loop speak. And when it does, through a number, a message, a glitch, a perfectly timed moment, pause. Don't brush it off. Feel the alignment. Reinforce the signal. You're not hallucinating. You're receiving data. In the end, synchronicity is not a bonus feature of life. It's a primary interface of the quantum loop. It's how the field tells you you're getting warmer. You're refining your location. Keep going. Learn to read the signs, not for superstition, but for precision. They are messages in motion. And the more you learn to interpret them, the more fluently you speak the language of the loop. Next, we focus on the most direct feedback tool you'll ever encounter, reality itself. Not just as a stage, but as a mirror reflecting you back to yourself with unrelenting accuracy. Let's now explore the quantum mirror effect and how your world is showing you your code in real time. Every moment, your life is showing you something, but not just the surface of events. Not just the circumstances or the people. Your life is showing you you. It's not reacting to you randomly. It's mirroring you with exquisite precision. This is the quantum mirror effect, a function of the loop where your internal patterns are reflected in the external structure of your experience. When something keeps showing up in your life, conflict, lack, disconnection, it's not the world punishing you. It's the field echoing the frequency you've stabilized internally. It's the loop showing you what script is running in the background. This mirror effect is constant, unrelenting, but not cruel. It's neutral. It shows you what you've been rehearsing, what you've been broadcasting, and what version of you the field believes to be active. Most people miss this. They focus on symptoms, trying to fix the job, the relationship, the external variables, without realizing that those are just reflections. Adjusting the mirror doesn't change the image. Adjusting the self does. This isn't philosophical. It's mechanical. Just like light reflects your face in a mirror without judgment, the quantum loop reflects your energy with precision. Your beliefs, your assumptions, your emotional tones, these become the template. And the world around you becomes the surface that template is projected onto. If you believe people can't be trusted, your life will present examples. If you carry unresolved anger, you'll encounter events that activate it. If you broadcast confidence and clarity, your reality will start to organize around opportunities, solutions, and flow. The mirror doesn't choose the image. You do. And once you see that clearly, the reflection becomes your greatest teacher. So how do you read the mirror? You start with your environment, not with judgment, with awareness. Look at the quality of your conversations, the tone of your relationships, the frequency of your emotional states, the type of problems that keep repeating. Each of these is a mirror, a clue, a readout of your inner code. Instead of blaming, become curious. What belief is this pattern echoing? What frequency did this situation respond to? What aspect of me is being reflected here? This is not about guilt. It's about decoding. The mirror is not asking for apology. It's offering you feedback. Let's take an example. You're constantly misunderstood. People don't seem to hear what you're really trying to say. You leave conversations feeling invisible or dismissed. Pause. Instead of resenting the world, ask, what frequency could I be holding that sends out a signal of not worth listening to? It might be a childhood imprint. It might be recent rejection. It might be a belief that your voice doesn't matter. Whatever it is, the moment you identify it, the reflection can start to change. Not because the world suddenly becomes kinder, but because your signal is no longer broadcasting invisibility. You change your belief, your posture, your tone, your presence. And the world, obeying the mirror principle, updates the reflection. This is how change becomes visible. Not through outer control, but inner alignment. Here's something essential to understand. The mirror responds to consistency. You can't test it once and expect a new reflection. The loop needs stabilization to lock in a new image. So if you've been broadcasting fear for years and suddenly shift to confidence for a few days, you may not see immediate results. Not because it isn't working, but because the old image is still fading. The mirror lags slightly, but it always catches up. Your job is to keep stabilizing the image you want reflected, even when the surface hasn't caught up yet. That's the training. That's the recalibration. And when you stay in it long enough, the reflection must change. It's not optional. It's inevitable. There's a reason inner work matters more than external control. The world you experience is not the result of effort alone. It's the result of coherence. Coherence between your inner narrative and your outer expression. When those two align, the mirror responds with clarity. But when you say one thing and feel another, act confidently but believe in failure, the loop reflects the dominant frequency, not the loudest one. This is why honesty with yourself is a gateway to transformation. Not emotional indulgence, but energetic transparency. The mirror can't lie to you, but it can show you the lies you're still carrying. Use it. Every difficult person, every blocked goal, every repeating cycle is a message from the mirror. And every breakthrough, synchronicity, and moment of flow is a signal, too. Reality is constantly showing you the code you're running. See it clearly, and you can change the code. Next, we move to the moment where the loop becomes most responsive, when probabilities collapse and a new path becomes visible. Not as possibility, but as action. The ability to consciously collapse your old signal and choose a different version of the field. Let's now explore how to hack the loop itself. There is a moment when the loop becomes soft. A moment when the pattern hasn't fully stabilized, when reality hasn't locked in, and in that space you have the power to make a different choice. This is the collapse point. The moment the loop is rewritten not through theory, but through deliberate action, aligned thought, and focused energy. In quantum mechanics, wave function collapse is the point at which all possibilities reduce to one outcome, based on observation. Before collapse, everything exists as potential. After collapse, one version becomes actual. Your life works the same way. Every thought you think, every decision you make, Every moment of awareness is a potential collapse point. And when done consciously with intention and alignment, you are hacking the loop, installing new code and stabilizing new timelines. Most people live on autopilot. They collapse the loop unconsciously, based on fear, on habit, on inherited stories. So their reality doesn't change, not because they're incapable, but because they keep choosing the same frequency over and over. But the moment you become conscious of the collapse is the moment you take control of the script. Here's the truth. The field doesn't care who you used to be. It only reflects the signal you stabilize now. So stop asking whether you're worthy of change. Ask whether you're collapsing the old loop with new energy, or reinforcing the old with recycled emotion. Let's get practical. You're in a familiar pattern, feeling anxious about money. The same thoughts return, the same fear. You want a new result, but you're caught in the loop. Pause. This is your collapse point. You're standing at the edge of two timelines. One where the anxiety repeats, and one where a different version of you becomes active. To hack the loop, you must do something unfamiliar, issue a new command into the field. This might be shifting your focus to gratitude, even when nothing has changed yet. Choosing stillness instead of panicking. Speaking a new affirmation with emotional charge. Visualizing the next best version of you responding calmly. Acting with generosity when scarcity says, don't. These are not random actions. They are disruption codes. Each one destabilizes the old pattern. And if repeated, they stabilize a new one. This is how rituals become powerful. Not because they're magical, but because they encode new behavior with meaning, emotion, and frequency. When done intentionally, a ritual becomes a container for collapse. A way to focus energy into a single timeline and begin feeding it consistently. That's what prayer, movement, breathwork, mantras, even journaling can do. Not because the actions are inherently spiritual, but because they carry intention. And intention is what sends the clearest signal into the loop. Let's talk about belief. Belief is the stabilizer of collapse. If you override fear with action but carry deep skepticism about the process, the loop receives mixed signals. The collapse won't stabilize fully. But when you act and believe that the act is forming a new version of you, even if it hasn't yet appeared in your world, you begin to lock in the new reality. Belief doesn't mean certainty. It means resonance. It means feeling that your action is more aligned with your future than your fear is with your past. That's when the loop starts to update. There's no need to collapse perfectly. There's only a need to collapse consistently. Catch the old pattern. Choose differently. Repeat. That's the rhythm of quantum transformation. And when the old feedback shows up, as it will, don't panic. Remember, the loop has memory. The old data still has momentum. But if you continue issuing a different signal, that memory fades. The loop begins correcting around the new code. And soon, you start living a different reality, not because the world changed, but because your frequency stopped matching the old one. This is hacking. Not hacking the universe. Hacking the pattern you've been feeding. Every moment is a potential collapse point. Right now, you could speak differently, think differently, feel differently, and that would be enough to start shifting the entire field. You don't have to wait for a miracle. You are the mechanism. Use your choice. Use your emotion. Use your signal. That's how the loop collapses. And reboots with new information. Next, we move to the final step in this framework, when you stop simply interacting with the loop and begin embodying the role of architect. No longer reacting, but initiating. No longer asking how, but demonstrating who. Let's now step fully into the seat of the quantum self. The loop is no longer a mystery. You've seen how it reflects thought, magnifies emotion, stabilizes patterns, and responds to clarity with structure. You've watched how timelines shift, how reality mirrors, and how the unseen echoes become the seen experience. Now it's time to stop managing the loop from the outside and start designing it from the core. This is the shift from being a participant in your reality to becoming its architect, not a controller, not a manipulator, but a creator working with precision, rhythm, and awareness. This is not a metaphorical idea. It's a practical role. The field responds to those who take authorship seriously, not through force but through energetic leadership. Becoming the architect means you stop waiting for signs and start sending them. You stop negotiating with old patterns and begin instructing the field with clarity. You stop hoping and start generating. It means living not as a reactor, but as a generator. So what does this look like in practice? It starts with a conscious blueprint, not a wish list, not a vague vision board, a structured internal model of who you are becoming, how that version of you feels, what decisions they make, and what emotional signal they stabilize daily. This is the new foundation, your internal architecture. If you can't describe this version of yourself in clear energetic detail, the loop will default to your previous code. It's not personal. It's mechanical. So sit with the question, who is the architect version of me? This isn't about role models. It's about your highest pattern, your most coherent, alive, focused state. What beliefs does that version carry? What assumptions do they live by? What emotional tone fills their day? What reality surrounds them because of who they've chosen to become? This is your source code. From this, everything else builds. Once this identity is clear, embodiment becomes the practice. Not performance, not pretending, but daily alignment. You wake up and choose that frequency, not because it's easy, but because it's consistent with your architecture. You speak as that version, even if no one understands. You move as that version, even when the world hasn't mirrored it back yet. You give, create, and respond from that version, even when your nervous system wants to regress. This is not fake. It's formative. You're writing data into the loop with each choice. And here's the key. You do it before there's proof. That's the defining trait of an architect. Architects don't wait for buildings to appear. They hold the structure in the unseen until the world catches up. You must do the same. Let's talk discipline. To maintain your signal, especially while the old feedback is still fading, you'll need energetic habits. Not just motivational bursts, but structured practices that stabilize your frequency and focus. These are your scaffolding. Morning recalibration. 10 minutes of emotional tuning before you touch the outside world. Conscious observation. Watching your thoughts not as truths, but as variables. Emotional hygiene. Releasing stored charge daily so the past doesn't hijack the loop. Reality scripting. Journaling or speaking the patterns you're now choosing to broadcast. Breath alignment. Using rhythm and stillness to reset your field before major decisions. Visualization labs. Revisiting your inner blueprint with full sensory immersion. These are not to impress anyone. They are to train your loop, to anchor your system in the identity you are stabilizing. Without these, the old loop often returns, not because it's stronger but because it's more practiced. But with consistency, the old loop fades. The new one becomes dominant, and your external world starts reflecting the architecture you've been building inside. You are no longer asking, when will my reality shift? You're asking, how precisely am I calibrating my frequency today? Because now you know the field is already listening. The loop is already adjusting. The mirror is already turning. The shift isn't in the distance. It's in the pattern you choose next. Now here's something deeper. Becoming the architect isn't only about your life. It's about your contribution to the collective field. As your loop stabilizes in clarity, confidence, and coherence, you emit a frequency that impacts others, even without speaking. You become a reference point. Others pick up on your stability. They start questioning their own scripts. They begin tuning into higher versions of themselves, not because you told them to, but because your loop is demonstrating what's possible. This is leadership at the energetic level. It's not ego. It's service. The clearer your field becomes, the more the collective matrix starts to shift. Because every architect reinforces a higher blueprint, and that blueprint becomes accessible to everyone else through the resonance of the field. You're no longer trapped in personal loops. You are now influencing the larger pattern. That's the silent power of frequency. And this is where your authority deepens. Because now you stop needing the outer world to catch up. You realize it will, but only when you stop negotiating with the delay. Only when you stay loyal to the identity you're stabilizing, regardless of appearances. You become the version of yourself who no longer asks for signs, because you are the signal. This doesn't mean you never waver. It doesn't mean your life becomes perfectly smooth. It means your signal doesn't get hijacked by surface noise. You know what you're broadcasting. You know what you're designing. And when the mirror shows lag, you don't regress. You hold the image, because architects don't wait for validation. They hold the vision until the structure becomes visible. And then suddenly, gradually, unstoppably, the loop adjusts. Now let's connect every piece of this framework so it becomes integrated and fully usable, not as theory, but as a system you live by. You've seen the loop. You understand that it feeds on repetition, coherence, and clarity. That it stabilizes around your most practiced emotional state. You've tracked your signal. You know your thoughts, emotions, and beliefs are not neutral. They're inputs, instructions. You've learned the mirror. You no longer take reality at face value. You read it as data, accurate, honest, revealing. You've practiced collapse. You've trained yourself to notice the choice point and issue a new command. And now you take full authorship. Not occasionally, not when it's easy, but daily, repeatedly, precisely. You don't do this for performance. You do it because it is the most honest expression of the power within you. Not mystical, not idealistic, structural, functional, embodied. Becoming the architect means you're no longer limited by the past, defined by the present, or obsessed with the future. You work with the now as your construction site. You see the loop as your design interface. And you treat your attention, emotion, and focus as building materials. That's real creation, not reaction. Creation. And from that position, there's no need to force. You're not convincing the universe. You're instructing the field. You're not begging for miracles. You're issuing blueprints. The results? They may show gradually. They may arrive suddenly. That's the loop's job. Your job is stabilization. You maintain the internal state. The field mirrors it. The timeline updates. Reality conforms. This is not a belief system. It's a system of being. It doesn't require you to adopt a new philosophy. It requires you to remember what's always been true, that reality is not fixed. It's responsive, that your energy is not symbolic. It's instructive, that the field is not separate. It's participatory, that the loop is not punishment. It's precision, and that you are not waiting for transformation. You are the transformer. Now take this knowing and build. Construct your emotional field with intention. Shape your focus like scaffolding. Anchor your identity not in reaction, but in initiation. Because the version of reality you've been seeking is already coded into the quantum field. The question is no longer, is it possible? The question is, will I stabilize the version of me who lives there? And when the answer becomes yes, not just intellectually but energetically, everything in your loop will begin to reflect that alignment. The signal will lock. The mirror will shift. The structure will appear. Not as magic, as architecture. And you will no longer be the seeker. You will be the source. Welcome to the loop you now control. Welcome to the version of you that rewrites reality. Welcome to the architect you were always meant to remember.